The studio lights burned like interrogation lamps, hot and merciless, as the host's voice echoed with forced enthusiasm. Please welcome our surprise guest, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The audience erupted, not with applause, but with a sharp intake of breath, the kind that comes before a car crash you can't look away from. Senator John Kennedy, seated comfortably just seconds earlier, blinked once, slowly, as AOC stepped onto the stage in a crimson blazer that screamed both confidence and warning. She didn't smile. She didn't shake his hand. She walked straight to the center of the set and leaned into the mic with the gravity of a prosecutor preparing for her final blow. Before we continue this celebration of so-called educational reform, she said, her voice icy, let me remind America that the man being honored tonight once withheld funding from schools in marginalized districts while promoting himself as a champion for equality. The room fell into stunned silence, the kind that drowns out even the hum of cameras. Kennedy's eyebrows rose a fraction, but he said nothing. The host looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. The control room, visible through the glass, was in chaos. Producers gestured wildly. Cut the feed? Keep rolling? But the live ticker on screen didn't lie. This was happening in real time. On Twitter, the clip hit 100,000 views before she even finished her sentence. She turned to face Kennedy fully now. You built your career on charm and Southern sayings, Senator, but that doesn't erase the damage you've done to communities that needed more than just smiles and speeches. The audience, a mix of educators, students, and journalists, shifted uncomfortably. Some clapped, others looked horrified. Kennedy remained still, like an old tree refusing to bend in a storm. Then AOC delivered the dagger. You denied a funding bill that would have saved 5 schools in my district while claiming to support rural learning initiatives. That's not leadership. That's targeted neglect. She turned toward the cameras, her eyes sharp, calculating, knowing this moment would go viral. And it did. Within minutes, headlines screamed, AOC exposes Kennedy on live TV, hashtags multiplied. Panelists on other networks were already dissecting it. But what no one saw, not the audience, not the crew, not even AOC, was the small envelope in Kennedy's inside coat pocket. He hadn't moved. He hadn't flinched. But his fingers rested gently on the envelope, as if it were a holy relic. Because in that envelope was the one thing that would shatter everything she had just said. A single letter. A handwritten note. With a signature that would make the world stop spinning for just a moment. And here's the part where you need to lean in, because what happens next flips this entire story upside down. If you're still watching, hit that like button and comment the number 9 below. Because what's inside that letter isn't just paper and ink. It's a truth AOC forgot the world might remember. And Kennedy? He didn't come tonight to fight. He came to remind us all that silence doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes silence means you've been waiting for the right moment to speak. And that moment is coming. Kennedy sat still for a long moment after the applause faded, and the spotlight shifted back to him. The weight of the moment settling into the fibers of his seat like humidity before a storm. The envelope was still tucked in his inner pocket, but his hand had moved now, resting on his knee, palm open, as if inviting the chaos to settle. The host tried to salvage the moment, offering a nervous chuckle and pivoting to commercial. But Kennedy lifted a single finger, not in anger, but in request. If I may, he said, his voice slow and steady, tinged with that unmistakable Louisiana drawl, I reckon this might be the time. The studio went dead silent. No teleprompter, no cue cards, just a man with decades of service behind him and one truth in his pocket. He reached into his coat and gently pulled out the envelope, its edges worn from being handled many times, as if he'd rehearsed this moment in private. He laid it carefully on the desk, like an artifact. "This here," he said softly, "is a letter written by the congresswoman sitting across from me. Not typed, not drafted by a team, written by hand, signed in ink." He unfolded the letter with reverence, revealing handwriting unmistakably personal, cursive loops, scratch-outs, words that bled with sincerity. "It was sent to my office 4 years ago," he continued, "after I supported an emergency grant to a school in her district that was about to shut down." AOC's smile tightened. The audience leaned forward. The host froze. Kennedy began to read. "Dear Senator Kennedy, I am writing to thank you personally for your unexpected support on the East Bronx School Initiative. Your advocacy allowed us to keep programs running that would have otherwise left hundreds of children without after-school care. I may not always agree with your politics, but your humanity today reminded me that public service still means something." He paused and looked up. Signed, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The air thickened. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. The host looked like he had just seen a ghost. AOC's expression, so composed moments earlier, cracked. Barely, but enough. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her eyes darted toward her team off-camera. One aide shook their head slowly, mouthing, "Not yet." Kennedy didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He just folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope with the same care one might use with a family heirloom. "Now, I ain't one to hold on to things to embarrass someone," he said, glancing around the room. "But when someone says you never helped, when someone paints you as a villain in front of the country, well, I think the truth deserves a seat at the table, too." What followed was not applause, but breathless silence, the kind that tells you something just shifted permanently. On social media, the clip of him reading the letter began spreading like wildfire. Reactions poured in. "Wait, she thanked him? This can't be real. Metadata?" It didn't take long. Within 15 minutes, internet sleuths had verified the letter's authenticity. A scanned copy of the original fax showed matching signature and congressional letterhead. Even an old tweet from AOC's staff surfaced, praising a bipartisan effort for saving Bronx programs, timed exactly with the date of the letter. The narrative, once so one-sided, began to fray. Kennedy hadn't just defended himself. He had exposed something deeper. That in the race to destroy someone's reputation, we sometimes forget our own footprints in the sand. But he wasn't done yet. "I believe people change," he said quietly, as the host finally found his voice again. "Maybe she doesn't feel the same way today. That's her right. But to come here, on live television, and rewrite history? That's not public service. That's theater." The audience murmured. You could feel the energy begin to flip. People who had walked in ready to cheer now exchanged uncertain glances. The host, clearly shaken but trying to regain control, attempted to pivot again. "Well, this certainly adds context to the conversation." But Kennedy raised his hand gently, still respectful. "Let me just say this, and then I'll sit quiet. Truth doesn't expire. Kindness don't lose value just because the cameras are rolling, and a thank you should never become a weapon when it's no longer convenient." He sat back, not triumphant, but peaceful. And in that moment, for the first time since she walked on stage, AOC had nothing to say. Not because she was silenced, but because the one thing louder than a microphone is a memory. The broadcast had barely ended when the internet began its descent into flames. Clips of Senator Kennedy reading AOC's letter flooded every social platform imaginable. The footage spread like an electrical storm. Raw, unedited, impossibly powerful. Someone looped the moment he read the words, "Your humanity reminded me," over gentle piano music, and it hit 1 million views in under 2 hours. Memes exploded. Side-by-side screenshots of AOC praising Kennedy in the letter versus her public accusations that night took over the trending tabs. Headlines spun on their heels. Kennedy's calm crushes live accusation. AOC's letter becomes Exhibit A. Receipts never lie. And while the digital world raged and dissected Kennedy, he was on a plane, quiet as ever, coat folded on his lap, the envelope safely tucked into a leather-bound folder beside him. Back in Washington, the fallout was immediate. Donors to AOC's education initiative began pulling support, citing concerns over credibility. Former allies offered non-answers to press questions, while a few bluntly admitted they were disappointed by the unnecessary public attack. Meanwhile, teachers and school staff from the Bronx began speaking out, not with rage, but with measured clarity. One principal posted a video saying, "We remember when that grant came through. It saved our library, literally. Why pretend otherwise?" Another former staffer posted a photo of students holding signs from that very year. Thank you, Senator Kennedy. The narrative was no longer controlled by flashy accusations. It was now being written by those who lived through the truth. And then, out of nowhere, came the second twist. A journalist from a national education magazine dug up footage from 4 years ago, a town hall meeting in which AOC herself praised a bipartisan push to fund emergency school grants. In the clip, she says, on record, "Senator Kennedy may surprise some people, but his support on this issue gave our kids the win they deserved." The clip, buried in a sea of forgotten media, had resurfaced like a ghost, and it hit hard. Harder than the letter, because it was her voice, her words. No ambiguity. The timeline aligned perfectly with the letter Kennedy read. Suddenly, her accusation wasn't just hypocritical, it was dismantled by her own public record. Kennedy's team issued no statement. His communications director simply posted a link to the town hall video with the caption, "For those asking for context, we believe actions speak for themselves." The comment section lit up, dozens of people echoing the same sentiment. He didn't destroy her, she destroyed herself. Even traditionally liberal outlets began to shift tone, acknowledging that the handling of this confrontation may have been strategically unsound, and calling the incident an unforced collapse of credibility. And still, Kennedy remained silent. Not out of pride, not out of strategy, but because he believed the evidence should stand on its own. When reporters cornered him on Capitol Hill, he simply tipped his hat and said, "Truth don't need a spokesman." That quote, short and clean, made the front page. AOC, on the other hand, was unraveling. In an emergency podcast episode released by her team, she attempted to explain the letter as a gesture made under political pressure, and the town hall clip as selectively edited, but the public wasn't buying it. Comment sections, once her fortress of support, filled with confusion, questions, even betrayal. One viral comment summed up the sentiment best. "If Kennedy's so awful, why'd you thank him in ink and praise him on video? You can't rewrite the past just because it's inconvenient now." But the final blow came during a student panel at a local high school, where Kennedy was scheduled to speak weeks before the drama. The event had almost been canceled in the aftermath, but the students insisted he still come. When he arrived, they gave him a standing ovation, not because he was perfect, not because he was on TV, but because, as one student put it, "You didn't fight back with fire, you just held up the mirror." During his closing remarks, he didn't mention AOC's name once. Instead, he said, "Sometimes, the hardest thing is to stay kind when it'd be easier to swing. But if the next generation learns anything from this, I hope it's that truth can speak softly and still shake the ground." The moment was filmed by a student and uploaded that night. It went viral in a matter of hours. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was human. And in that quiet, unwavering humility, Senator Kennedy didn't just win a moment. He reclaimed something far more powerful, a sense of integrity the public had almost given up on. The next morning, the Capitol buzzed like a kicked anthill. Journalists flooded its marble halls, whispering the same 3 words over and over. She got caught. But Senator Kennedy walked through it all like a man immune to firestorms. No entourage, no swagger, just a briefcase in one hand and a quiet resolve in the other. What had started as a takedown attempt on national television had mutated into something far bigger. A nationwide reckoning on accountability, memory, and the weaponization of half-truths. And while AOC's team scrambled behind closed doors, trying to craft a narrative salvage plan, the American public had already started writing their own. Every major network replayed the same sequence: her accusation, his silence, the letter, and then the footage. Side-by-side frames of her town hall praise and her live TV assault looped endlessly. It wasn't just a contradiction. It was a collapse. By noon, public opinion polls had shifted. AOC's favorability rating dropped 7 points in 24 hours, the sharpest dip of her career. What struck people wasn't the drama itself, but how Kennedy responded. No legal threats, no viral clapbacks, just evidence, facts, humanity. In an age of shouting, he whispered, and the whole country leaned in to hear. That afternoon, a mid-tier podcast posted an interview with the journalist who uncovered the town hall clip. The host asked, "Why do you think it matters so much now?" The reporter answered simply, "Because we've reached a point where everyone's trying to rewrite history in real time. But when someone saves the receipts, not out of revenge but out of principle, it resets the stakes." Kennedy didn't try to own her. He just reminded us of what actually happened. That quote alone was shared over 5 million times. But perhaps the most stunning turn came from within AOC's own district. A coalition of parents and educators released a joint statement. "We are disappointed that a moment of real gratitude and bipartisan cooperation was twisted for spectacle." The school funding that was made possible by Senator Kennedy's efforts had a real, lasting impact on our community. The statement was short, direct, and deeply personal. Attached to it was a photograph from 2019, AOC and Kennedy standing side by side, holding a ribbon at the reopening of a Bronx learning center. In the photo, she's smiling, he's clapping, and the banner behind them reads, "Together for Education." By that evening, late-night shows, influencers, and cultural commentators had jumped on the moment, not to mock, but to reflect. One monologue went viral when the host said, "What we saw wasn't a politician being destroyed. It was a lesson being taught." Kennedy didn't cancel her. He confronted her, with grace, with proof, and with the past she didn't expect anyone to remember. That clip alone sparked a new wave of online discussion. Teachers created lesson plans around the event. High school ethics classes debated the responsibility of memory in public discourse. The phrase, "hold the receipts, not the grudge," trended across platforms. Meanwhile, Kennedy's office remained as quiet as ever. His press secretary issued one line. "Senator Kennedy believes the American people are smart enough to draw their own conclusions," and they did. Calls and emails poured in, not just from supporters, but from people who admitted they hadn't trusted him before. A woman from Portland wrote, "I don't agree with you on many things, but the way you handled this made me believe in humility again." A veteran from Ohio messaged, "Thank you for not turning it into a circus. You reminded us what dignity looks like." Even some of AOC's former defenders began posting thoughtful threads, wondering aloud when exactly the pursuit of public influence had overtaken the responsibility to be honest. Back at the Capitol, Kennedy remained unchanged. He ate lunch at the same cafeteria, sat on the same bench outside the rotunda. He answered questions when asked, but never stretched the moment beyond what it needed. And when a reporter finally cornered him and asked, Do you feel vindicated? Hmm? He shook his head gently and replied, I wasn't trying to win. I was just trying to tell the truth. But perhaps the most unexpected moment came at dusk, when a group of high school students from the Bronx, many of whom had benefited from that very education grant, arrived in D.C. They hadn't planned it as a protest or a spectacle. They just wanted to say thank you. They waited patiently outside his office, holding handwritten notes and wearing pins that read, Truth Still Matters. When Kennedy emerged, surprised but smiling, one girl stepped forward and handed him a small envelope. It's our turn to write you a letter, she said, because what you did, we'll never forget. Kennedy paused, visibly moved. He tucked the envelope into his jacket, right where the first one had been, and replied softly, Then maybe this time, we'll all remember the right way. The glow of Capitol Hill faded into the soft orange haze of early evening as camera crews packed up and the buzz of breaking news gave way to the murmur of something more powerful. Reflection. Yet inside one downtown media studio, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat rigid beneath layers of makeup and high-wattage lighting, facing a camera lens like it was a firing squad. This was supposed to be her comeback moment, her opportunity to control the narrative, to reshape the backlash that had ballooned into something even her most loyal aides couldn't contain. But as the interview began, her composure wavered. The host, typically sympathetic, leaned forward with quiet intensity and asked the question America was waiting to hear. Why did you thank Senator Kennedy in that letter if you believed he was harming your community? The silence that followed was heavy, not theatrical, real. AOC blinked, shifted, offered a tight smile, then began a practiced explanation about political context and nuanced advocacy. But the words fell flat. They weren't wrong. They just weren't enough. The damage had already been done. What was once a strong, calculated voice now sounded hollow under the weight of public contradiction. Somewhere, someone clipped that awkward pause and posted it to social media with the caption, When the truth speaks louder than spin. It went viral in under an hour. And outside that studio, the world was watching. Commentators across the spectrum didn't gloat, they dissected. What happened wasn't a political loss, it was a cultural fracture. One pundit called it, the moment credibility died on camera. But it wasn't Kennedy who had killed it. It was the past. The irrefutable kind, in ink and video, that doesn't bend for perception. The American public had seen something they rarely get, a clash between accusation and receipt, and the receipt won. Back in Washington, Kennedy remained a figure of contrast. While his opponent scrambled, he returned to his daily routine, only now accompanied by an avalanche of thank you letters, invitations to speak, and messages from students, parents, veterans, and educators. His staff, typically composed and measured, found themselves overwhelmed by the surge. One aide, watching a montage of students reading their own thank you notes aloud on a morning show, whispered, "We didn't plan this, it just happened." And that was the magic. Nothing was forced, nothing was performed. Kennedy had simply done what he always did, kept the truth close and his voice calm. But even the calmest tides have an undertow. One night, as Kennedy sat at his desk reviewing rural education proposals, his chief of staff entered with a tablet. "You need to see this," she said. It was a live stream, AOC again, but this time not on TV. She'd taken to social media, raw and unscripted. No teleprompters, just her, alone, looking tired. She spoke directly to the camera, her voice quiet. "Maybe I got caught up in something bigger than me," she admitted. "Maybe I tried too hard to win the room instead of remembering the truth I once respected." The feed froze for a second, buffering, and then resumed. "I don't agree with Senator Kennedy on everything, but once I saw the good in what he did, and I shouldn't have tried to erase that just because the narrative changed." The comments poured in, some supportive, some skeptical, but many just stunned. Because whether it was a political maneuver or a moment of genuine humility, it was the first time she acknowledged her own contradiction. And more importantly, she called him by name, not an opponent, not he. She said, "Senator Kennedy." The clip hit every major network within 30 minutes. Editors rushed to interpret it. Some saw redemption, others saw strategy. But Kennedy didn't see any of that. Watching from his office, he simply nodded once, then turned the tablet off. "Everyone's got a learning curve," he said quietly. "Even teachers." He went back to his papers, his pen gliding effortlessly across a new education amendment he'd been drafting for months. The movement sparked by this clash had taken root. Teachers began organizing community events under the banner of Truth in Action. High schools launched student-run forums on public accountability. College courses adjusted curricula to include the Kennedy letter moment as a case study in communication ethics. And then came the real twist. Not a headline, not a scandal, but a ripple of reform. A bipartisan group of senators introduced a bill mandating permanent transparency archives for all federal education grants. They called it the People's Ledger Act, inspired not by legislation, but by a letter written in sincerity and remembered in conflict. When Kennedy was asked how he felt about the tribute, he shrugged modestly. "I didn't write that letter," he said, "but I'm glad it was written, and I'm glad we didn't forget it." The battle may have started with accusations and applause, but it ended somewhere quieter, deeper, and more lasting. In the wake of spectacle, something real had emerged. Accountability without venom, integrity without pride, and a reminder that sometimes the softest voice leaves the deepest mark. Weeks passed. The headlines slowly shifted from controversy to consequence. What had begun as a media brawl between two high-profile figures had now evolved into something far more profound, a cultural reflection. Across campuses and conference halls, Kennedy's calm defense was no longer being discussed in the context of drama, but in the context of leadership. Professors broke down the now famous moment as a case study in communication ethics. Civics teachers played the footage of Kennedy reading the letter to high school seniors, asking them, "What matters more, how loud you speak, or how true your words are?" But Kennedy, ever averse to spotlight seeking, declined the interviews. He declined the victory laps. He'd never been interested in winning a moment. He remained focused, quiet, steady. His team, however, had noticed the shift. Emails flooded in daily from school boards asking to adopt his transparency model. Education nonprofits requested guidance. Students across the country wrote essays about the Kennedy letter as part of scholarship applications. It had all taken a life of its own. Not because Kennedy demanded it, but because people recognized something they had been starved for. Truth delivered with grace. And it wasn't just students. A retired school principal from Georgia mailed him a journal from the 1980s in which she had documented the first time her school received unexpected federal support for after-school programs. Signed off by then-freshman Senator Kennedy. Tucked inside the pages was a note that simply read, "You've been doing this longer than we've been watching. Thank you for staying the same." Kennedy read it twice, quietly, and set it beside the now famous letter from AOC. Not out of irony, but out of symmetry. 2 letters, 2 truths, 1 journey. The ripple effect reached further than anyone expected. AOC, once the source of the storm, had retreated from the spotlight temporarily. Her public statements grew measured, less combative. And while her critics still circled, something about her tone had shifted too. Less performative, more grounded. In one campus Q&A, a student asked her, "Do you regret writing that letter?" She paused, then answered, "No." I regret forgetting it. It was a rare moment of humility. And the audience responded not with applause, but with understanding. The crowd didn't want perfection. They wanted realness. And through all the noise, both Kennedy and AOC had been forced to confront their own legacies. Not through campaigns, but through something far harder. Public self-awareness. As spring approached, Kennedy received an invitation from a public middle school in Tulsa to speak at their annual Voices of Character assembly. His team suggested he skip it. It was small, untelevised, no press. But Kennedy insisted. He arrived quietly, shook hands with the principal, and walked into a gymnasium where hundreds of students sat on the floor, crisscross applesauce, clutching printed copies of his letter moment. He didn't give a speech. He told a story. About a moment when someone tried to shame him. About how he didn't react with anger. About how sometimes the quiet path is the strongest one. They may shout over you, he told them, but truth never needs a microphone. It just needs someone to carry it. As the crowd of young faces looked up at him, one student raised her hand. How do you know when to speak up and when to stay quiet? Kennedy smiled softly and answered, When the truth can speak for itself, listen. When it can't, help it find its voice. That clip, recorded on a teacher's phone, made its way online within hours, and for the second time in just a few months, Kennedy's quiet wisdom echoed far beyond the room it was spoken in. Comment sections filled not with rage or debate, but reflection. People weren't arguing. They were sharing stories, memories, questions, hopes. And when the final bell rang at that Tulsa school, a sixth grader slipped Kennedy a crumpled note before he left. It read, I want to be like you when I grow up. Someone who helps the truth stand tall. And with that, the saga closed. Not in triumph, not in scandal, but in stillness. The kind that lingers when the shouting ends, and the truth has finally been heard.